start to slide on in. How many are in the waiting room? Okay. If I move over, I just thought that when I talk, it allows Sebastian's to be on the screen in the background. But it doesn't really allow because the camera zooms in on just on me and not on the screen. So anyway, my idea doesn't work. Okay, thanks. Oh, nice turnout here on the waiting room. Well, Sebastian, within a couple of minutes, while more people are coming in on the waiting room, the last time you and I talked, which was actually fairly recently, we were talking about the political confusion there in Bolivia.
Yeah.
And the way that the government is being insensitive towards communities.
Yeah.
I realize that you perhaps have to be careful in choosing your words.
Absolutely.
But before we get into talking about birds, do you want to make a comment on politics in Bolivia, which can be, I know, an explosive topic?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't include any politics in my presentation, just to be on the safe side. And I mean, we have to say that, I mean, the government is it's benefiting those communities who support them blindly 100%, but those communities that do not, they're the ones that are receiving the heat. So that's a bit of it's everything is just, it's plain political, right? It's games, you know, power games, staying in power, having the, you know, the right number of votes. And it's, I mean, one thing I just, you know, I've been noticing over the last few weeks or even months, but I didn't really digest it, because I mean, when you watch the Bolivian news on television, they're all private channels. Basically, there's one public television channel, which is basically government propaganda. It always has been, no matter who's in power. But all the private TV channels, they used to have decent news, right? Nowadays, all the news they broadcast is police, crime, violence. There is no, I mean, there are no more political topics being covered. Right? And I mean, we have a strong impression that is basically imposed on by the government. I don't know if they're paying them off or just telling them don't cover these topics or you'll get shut down. But it's really, I mean, it's before you would see when they, you know, would approve a new law or would, you know, all this sort of stuff, right? But nowadays, this has completely disappeared from the news coverage on TV. You have to read newspapers or listen to radio stations to sort of be informed about this. The television has completely cut this off. And, you know, most people are watching only television. They don't read the newspaper or listen to radio stations. I mean, news radio, right? So it's a bit worrying here as well, that in that respect.
Well, Sebastian, thank you for that. We will start here in a moment, but just to everybody who's joining, first, I want to just follow up on Sebastian's comment. I was in discussion this morning with our team in China. The Chinese media is also using the present situation to show fear to the people so that it strengthens the ability of the government to assert its position. And exactly the same thing is happening by Mr. Modi in India, using media to strengthen his ability to assert control of political authority over the expression of citizens' voice. And of course, the Taliban is doing that in Afghanistan, where we have 700 plus staff at work who are being very, very careful. So what your situation you describe in Bolivia is actually a worrisome, to me anyway, global trend. And many of us are just watching hour by hour what might happen in the Ukraine. And in Europe, where there's an area that Sebastian calls home, as in addition to the Amazon. With that morbid thought, I do also want to introduce another morbid thought that, as Sebastian is talking about his background, the last time he and Dan Robinson and I talked, I learned that into the Madidi National Park, which has the largest biodiversity on our blessed planet, there are now roads being built to bring in gold mining and tear apart the basic natural infrastructure that supports this remnant of our Earth's highest biodiversity. So in that regard, the work of Sebastian and the colleagues that Future Generations honors and admires with Armonia is much appreciated and recognized. I do also want, in the way of introducing Sebastian, to have everybody see the book that has got the Future Generations University Press logo stamped on the spine. Sebastian, it is a great honor to have this fabulous book unpublished with Future Generations University support. And to my mind, the idea of publishing a handbook for people to use to understand their environment is a superb, brilliant statement of what is the purpose of Future Generations. We're taking high-end science, such as you have done with your work in birds, and we're putting it into the hands of people, literally putting it into the hands of people in both in terms of knowledge, but also in terms of chance to use it. And so being associated with the English version of the earlier published Spanish version is a huge honor. And it's a huge honor for me right now to introduce a member of the Future Generations faculty, a treasured member of the faculty, Dr. Sebastian Herzog. Sebastian, thank you very much for presenting to us today, and welcome everybody from around the world who is now participating in Sebastian's presentation. So over to you, Sebastian.
Well, thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Daniel and Kelly, for inviting me, for having me. It's also a great honor for me to form part of Future Generations University. And really, I mean, the field guide as well, this is a superb collaboration. This is just a win-win. And we're having very similar goals, Armonia and Future Generations. So, you know, I'm really very happy that we have the opportunity to publish the second edition together, and also giving a much broader audience, or making it available to much broader audience. So just briefly about myself, although I have a few things in one slide and talk about myself. I'm German born and raised, but never intended to stay on the old continent. I spent while finishing my undergraduate degree in Germany, I went to UC Davis, University of California, Davis. I spent about 4 years there, and then had the opportunity to join a research expedition to Bolivia. I jumped on that opportunity, and I've been here based in Bolivia ever since. And I'm an ecologist, ornithologist by training, but have turned more and more conservationist and bird and conservation advocate over the years. So maybe we can start with a presentation, Shannon. Thank you. All right, I pondered quite a while, what should I present? How should I present it? And basically, Kelly sort of turned, I'll have a longer, more awkward title in the next slide, but that's what Kelly transformed it into, a journey to sustainable conservation in the Bolivian Amazon and beyond. I actually added the beyond because my work is much broader than just Bolivia now. I'm currently wearing 3 hats. One is, you already heard, research professor with Future Generations. I've also worked with the National Audubon Society, the international program, Audubon Americas, for a few years now, and was recently promoted to Protected Area Strategy Director. That's sort of my main job at the moment. And then I've also been, for the past 20 years, the science director of Asociación Armonía, which is a national bird conservation organization in Bolivia. We basically also, in addition to Future Generations University Press, the main publisher of the Birds of Bolivia Field Guide. Next, please. I apologize, my Zoom has problems with presenting PowerPoint, so Shannon will be moving this forward. So you'll hear next, please, every couple of minutes or so. So here's my longer title, right? Because I sort of tried to reflect in this what the transition I've been undergoing in my time in Bolivia. I started out as a hardcore research scientist. That was my dream. I wanted to become a research professor somewhere and just do bird research. I've always had a soft spot for conservation as well, because I knew we needed to protect our environment, to not only to protect the species on the planet, but also to protect ourselves, the human societies. And the more time I spent in Bolivia, the more I saw really the importance of not just doing this sort of through publishing conservation relevant papers, but actually getting my hands dirty and get involved in actually on the ground conservation. And then largely through the development and publication of the Birds of Bolivia Field Guide, I increasingly realized that we have to also move outside of our academic and conservation communities and go reach a broader audience to form a constituency for birds. And this is more or less what I've been doing for the past 28 years. Next one, please. So, as a lot of people may not know me, I thought I'd give a brief overview of this 28-year journey, my background a little bit. My first trip to Bolivia was in 1994, that opportunity that I just mentioned, while I was at UC Davis. And then a year later, I immediately decided I want to do my PhD research here on Andean bird communities. While I was still doing this, I obviously started building a network here. I was invited to teach an undergraduate course at the university in Cochabamba, which is the 3rd biggest city in the country. And after making the decision to move back to Germany for 8 months to actually finish my PhD thesis, because otherwise I would have just continued doing fieldwork down here in Bolivia, I defended my thesis and then went back to Bolivia and became the science director of Asociación Armonía, which I'm also one of the co-founders or re-founders. It was an organization that existed in the 90s, but then basically shut down because of a number of problems. And with a couple of colleagues of mine, we built up the organization again. I still tried to hang on to the more academic part, got a postdoc fellowship from the German Academic Exchange Service, and did research on that, published a couple of papers, and not nearly enough because I got basically dragged into a lot of other projects, including the Birds of Bolivia Field Guide, which is basically a 12, 13-year project, not full-time, on and off, but it's a massive undertaking to publish a field guide with almost 1,450 species in it for a country that has never had a field guide before. In between, I also worked because I became increasingly worried about and interested in climate change impacts on biodiversities and communities. So I worked with the Inter-American Institute for Global Change Research on a couple of longish projects on biodiversity and climate change in the tropical Andes, which then started taking me from Bolivia to Peru, Ecuador, and Colombia as well. And basically shortly after, or right after, we finally published the Birds of Bolivia Field Guide in 2017, the first edition here in Bolivia, printed in Bolivia. That was before, before I was invited to relate more closely with Future Generations. I got a job offer from the National Audubon Society to run the Chile program, the bird conservation program there, which was part-time, and I accepted it. Excuse me. And then by the end of 2020, before COVID hit, we published jointly the second edition of the English version of the Birds of Bolivia Field Guide. And it almost coincided also with the invitation to become a research professor at Future Generations, which I'm extremely grateful for. I had already basically not given up, but I said, you know, I'm at a different stage now. I wanted, as I mentioned before, I always sort of had the idea of becoming a professor at a university somewhere and doing research. And this sort of came out of the blue, and I'm very, very grateful for this. And then also recently, I was promoted in Audubon. It's a full-time job now, and it's the Protected Area Strategy Director position, which I will tell you a little bit more towards the end of the presentation. Next one, please. So I realize we have some people here in the webinar who may not be entirely familiar with South America. Fascinating continent. You can already see the topographic complexity here. We're basically stretching from hot, humid tropical to frosty southern Antarctic climate conditions. Next, please. Just, a few of the main features and bioregions or habitat types. We have the Andes mountain range that straddles the entire continent on the western coast and the Pacific coast. It's the longest continental mountain range in the world, almost 4,500 miles long. And it almost reaches 7,000 meters in altitude, or 22,383 feet. A little lower than the Himalayas, but I mean, it's just a huge, huge barrier that has contributed to the processes that formed the great diversity of birds and other species on the continent. We also have the driest non-polar desert in the world in South America, the Atacama Desert, also on the western coast. The famous Amazon Basin, tropical rainforest, together with the Congo Basin, the two largest rainforest areas on the planet, tropical rainforest. We have also a fairly large area. These are not all of the bioregions here, or the biomes. They're just the one that maybe stand out the most. The Cerrado biome, which is a tropical wooded savanna habitat type. Then we have the Gran Chaco, which is a dry subtropical scrapple thorn forest ecosystem. And further south, we have the Pampas, major in Argentina, the temperate grasslands. Next, please. Almost forgot about that. This little red circle indicates approximate location of Bolivia, right in the heart of South America. Next, please. So this is an ecoregion map of Bolivia. Don't want to get too technical here, but as you can see, there are a lot of different regions in the country. Although we're in the tropics, it's not all just tropical rainforest or Andean rainforest. Next, please. About a third of the country, a little less, is made up of the high Andes, above 3,500 meters above sea level. So these are high Andean or high alpine environments without trees, except very locally, one genus of trees is present. And it's basically really harsh, stark climatic conditions. Next, please. Then we have the East Andean slope, which is largely covered by forest or shrubland, which transitions from humid in the north to drier in the south. Next, please. The the southwestern Amazonian portion of Bolivia, that's actually not just covered by forest, but also has that huge blue patch of seasonally flooded savanna. And finally, the southeast of the country, the lowlands. Next, please. Is basically a patchwork of drier, less forested ecoregions. Next one, please. Here, a few photos that show you the range of environments and habitats where, it's not just all lush tropical forest, although it's a very tropical country. And often, Bolivia is called the Tibet of South America, but actually 2/3 of the countries are tropical lowlands, and only 1/3 of the country is Andean highlands. Next, please. So I already mentioned I am a trained ornithologist. So why study and protect birds? Why? I mean, apart from falling in love with birds at an early age, watching them come to the feeder on my balcony in Germany, birds perform many ecological functions beneficial to humans. Pollinization, seed dispersal, there are a number of them. And if we went into detail, we could talk this whole hour about this. But birds are also declining globally. And there's a recent study by a number of US-based conservation organizations that have shown that over the past 50 years, the North American continent has lost 3 billion individual birds due to human activities. Birds are bioindicators that are not only representative of biodiversity patterns in many other groups of organisms. So basically, they tell us, here is an area of high endemism. These species only occur here. They're threatened. That means we almost certainly will have a similar situation in several other taxonomic groups. So they help us save resources, and by just studying birds, we can do a lot for conservation. So they're indicative also of environmental health and problems like climate change. So they're basically the canary in the climate change coal mine. Next, please. And that's where one of Future Generations project kicks in, the Songs of Adaptation project, which is run by Naomi Bates. And I have had the honor of collaborating with Naomi and her team for the past year and a half or two now. So what is this project about? Right? I mean, already the header and the webpage says bioacoustic and community knowledge for climate change monitoring. So we have two important components here, communities and bioacoustics. And this is one of our Bolivian collaborators in the Bolivian jungle, the indigenous representative of an indigenous community there. So basically what we're doing here, we're carrying out automated bioacoustic monitoring of birds, so bird sounds, bird calls, bird songs, working with the local communities. And why are we doing this? Next slide, please. There is substantial published evidence now that birds are responding rapidly to global warming. Right? Birds are moving upslope in the mountains because temperatures are increasing. Mountaintops birds are going extinct on their mountaintops. So birds are, as I mentioned before, are great bioindicators. They tell us when there's a problem before anyone else might be able to notice, right? Of course, we can measure temperature and precipitation and then see, oh, it's getting warmer. But we don't have a baseline for many South American localities, right? The baseline, the climate knowledge baseline is very, very thin, and a lot of the climate modeling here depends on global climate model. So birds tell us immediately, hey, there's something going on here. This species 10 years ago was not at this elevation. Now we found it at this elevation. It's obviously escaping the warming of its habitat. Next, please. So we can use the birds by automated bioacoustic monitoring. We basically have these little devices that are shown on the top left hand corner that Shane is holding his hands there, and the photo next to it, we can see one in the background being installed in the Bolivian jungle. So these devices record birds 24 hours a day, or every other hour we can program them. And then we have a solid record of which birds are present and how often they sing. And then something that people who don't work with bioacoustics often may not realize, you can actually visualize sound. To the left at the bottom here, there are two forms of visualizing sound. The red one is basically how loud the sound is, and at the bottom we have frequency in hertz or kilohertz versus time. So each of these little check marks down at the bottom is when the bird vocalizes. It's not the bird in the picture, but this is actually an example from Nepal here. The Songs of Adaptation project does not just work in Bolivia, also has recording stations in Nepal and in the US. So that's basically, we're creating a non-stop record of bird vocalizations at specific localities, something that otherwise you would have to have a field ornithologist out there with a recorder and a microphone 24 hours a day and standing in the forest and recording and recording. Next slide, please. So through this visualization of these bird vocalizations, we can use artificial intelligence and machine learning approaches to automate the identification of that species. Once we've trained the models, once we've trained the algorithms, it can, with a certain degree of certainty, say, yes, that bird vocalized at 6:45 a.m. at station 1. And because we're recording throughout the year, then we get this record of how many vocalizations per day throughout the year at the 5 different recording stations we have in Bolivia. So this is the combination of these automated the recording devices, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. We've never had this opportunity before to gather so much data that will tell us so much about responses of birds to global change, to climate change. This is a unique opportunity that will be very important for the near future, to help us to help communities or support communities adapting to climate change. So this is cutting edge research, and it is a really great tool for conservation and community development and community adaptation to climate change. Next, please. There are more reasons to study birds and protect them. Birds are charismatic. I mean, who doesn't like, a cardinal or both, singing or, seeing them on your porch or in your garden? And they're everywhere. I mean, you can see them. They're in cities. They're there at the coast of Antarctica to all the way to Alaska, and so they're great ambassadors for connecting people with nature, right? And in a world where more and more people live in cities and don't even know that milk comes from cows, we need ambassadors that connect people. In Latin America specifically, the awareness and popularity of birds and birding or bird watching has really skyrocketed in recent years. And there are a number of reasons for this, but there's a big movement and it's a lot of younger people involved. The photo on the right is not staged. This was real, right? And there's only one non-Bolivian on this photo, which is the 70-year-old lady on the left-hand corner. The rest, they're all Bolivians, different ages, and they all got excited by a fairly common but flashy bird. Colombia, the bottom left photo is from Colombia. Colombia is known for now being sort of the mecca of bird-based tourism. They're the richest country in the world, and bird-based tourism really has taken off there with many, many benefits for local communities. Next, please. And birds, going beyond just the appeal and the ecology, birds are ideal for demonstrating the economic value of biodiversity, because in the end, nowadays, it all comes down to money, right? If you can't feed your family, then you're going to chop down the forest. That's just a fact of life, right? For people living in rural or underdeveloped areas. So birds, why are they ideal for demonstrating the economic value of biodiversity? There's been a report that was published a few years ago, Birds Mean Business, about the alternative livelihood opportunities for local communities that come through low-impact ecotourism, in this specific case, bird-based tourism. It's a report you can find on the web. It includes case studies for 4 different countries, and I think it was one of the first really publications that showed, hey, we're not just talking about some tree huggers or hippies that want to protect the pretty birds. It's a viable alternative for local communities to increase their livelihoods, their income. And just a few more or less, not random numbers, but they're from the report as well, to illustrate the economic incentives. Birdwatching tourists spent $47 million in Belize in 2012. That's 10 years ago. It's probably double now. And 39 million in the Bahamas in 2014. We're not talking about 5 backpackers who spend, $10 on a hostel a night. We're talking big bucks here. Next, please. And again, to put this more into perspective, this is US focused because that's where Audubon is based. This is another Audubon Society report, also supported by the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank. The United States has about 47 million birders and bird photographers, had in 2011. We don't know how many right now, 50, 60, 70. And 38%, so almost 18 million, they in 2011 took birding trips away from home. And many of those birders, they went to foreign countries. So they want to see Bolivian birds. They want to see Nepali birds. They want to see Afghanistan's birds. it's a lot of birders. It's like collecting stamps. They want to tick off a species. That's the hardcore birders see at the bottom left. They are basically listers, and they're after seeing as many species as possible in their lifetime. And another interesting detail, the Caribbean Tourism Organization published a study also a few years ago and found that an estimated 3 million international trips worldwide are taken each year for the main purpose of bird watching. So again, we're talking about a major market, a major opportunity when done right that can support local communities to develop sustainably and without destroying the environment. Next, please. Next question, why Bolivia? Obviously, in my case, as I mentioned, an opportunity came up. I came to Bolivia, which was a sort of lucky strike because it's one of the world's most biodiverse countries. Right now, the Bolivian bird list stands at 1,445, and we're still adding species. That's 14% of all known species on Earth. Bolivia is a landlocked country, no coastline, no gulls, no pelicans, no seabirds, and it's only about the size of Texas and California combined. It's a little over 1 million square kilometers, yes. And 42% of all species recorded in South America are found in Bolivia, in only 6.2% of the continent's total land area. So what does that mean? We have a lot of species squeezed in a fairly small area. Next, please. Only 5 countries in the world have more bird species. Colombia, Brazil, Peru, Ecuador, you see a pattern there. South America is the bird continent on the planet and one of the most biodiversity-rich continents. And then Indonesia is number 5 in the world. Bolivia has a number of endemic species, near endemics, and also a worrying number of 55 threatened species. And it's one of the biologically studied countries in the Americas. So I came to the right place, it seems. Next, please. So getting slowly back to the field guide topic, and I'll point out why this is so important, and it's not just a book. First of all, to be able to write a field guide, to produce knowledge, not just for the scientific community, but translate that to the people in general, you need to do a lot of field research. I spent many years in the field, going to many different places, walking, horseback, vehicles, snowstorms in the Bolivian Andes. We had to push that Land Cruiser up a 4,600 meter high pass. And in a couple of cases, we even had to hire a helicopter to take us to the remote sites. And always working with young Bolivian biologists to train them directly in the field and to have local involvement in the work. Next, please. So I'm not, I don't want to talk about, the academic aspect, the papers I've published. That is something that I don't want to address here in this presentation, but rather get to the point also that Daniel mentioned at the beginning. So what do you do with all this knowledge? You publish the paper, 15 people read it, great. I look at my H score or H factor and I can be, happy and proud of myself that I've accomplished something, but it's only being read in the academic. We're not reaching anyone else. So what better way of basically putting all this knowledge together, synthesizing it, making it accessible, understandable to almost everybody in the field guide, and which is what we did. I mean, initially it was partly motivated simply for selfish reasons. I came to Bolivia with 5 different field guides for other countries. There was no Bolivian field guide. My backpack included 5 field guides from different surrounding countries. One for all South America, only half the species were depicted. I struggled a lot when I came to Bolivia, first identifying the species. That we need a field guide for the country. That was the very selfish reason in the beginning. But then, quickly realized the field guide goes way beyond that. And what I maybe am most proud of usually or partly most proud of, when field guides are being published, they're being published in English by publishing houses that make money off of them. Commercial publishers. And then maybe 5, 6, 7 years later, when you beg them long enough, they give you, back some rights to publish that book in Spanish. We didn't go that route. We published it, the first edition, we published ourselves, Armonia, small NGO in Bolivia. We published it and printed it ourselves in Bolivia. It was a very steep learning curve, several mistakes made that we won't make again. And we immediately published it almost simultaneously in English and in Spanish, because we did want to have this book available for Bolivians. We didn't just want to produce a book that could be sold to US or British or foreign birding tourists. We wanted this to be available to Bolivians, big and small. And whenever I see photos like this, these are taken from Facebook, especially the book with the kid. The guy who took the photo and uploaded it, Dirk Decker, he's a friend of mine. He's Dutch. He runs a ecotourism agency, and I mean that's just like, wow, this was worth the effort. Having little kids, all sorts of people using the book that you spend 12 years, 13 years on, and the last. I mean, producing a field guide is, and that every field guide author will tell you this. Eventually, to get it over the finish line, you have to cut out everything else in your life, your family, almost food. The last 8 months, I worked 80 hours a week to get this book over the finish line. That's just how field guides for countries like that. And I wondered during that process, is it worth the effort? Should I just throw in the towel? But when I see pictures like that, I know, yes, it was worth it. Next one, please. Just a couple, peeks here at the book. It's the standard format. We have on the right-hand side, we have illustrations of the birds. We've had Bolivian illustrators involved in this. Unfortunately, only 2 out of the 13. But then we had 2 from Argentina, 2 from Brazil. So we tried to bring as many people from the region into the production of this book as possible. I'm the lead author, but I have 8 co-authors, also including a couple of Bolivians. So this was a collaborative effort. I was just basically the lead person on this project. Next, please. Hummingbird plate, as you can see, we have short, brief species accounts, and then we have range maps, which are rather detailed. They're not your typical range maps in field guides, which are a lot less elaborate. We actually developed these range maps over 4 years with geographic information systems. And you can see little black dots. Those are all the records we have in our database of each species. Next, please. And we didn't stop there. We know that the book weighs 2.5 pounds. People are complaining it's too big and heavy. When they talk to me about this, I tell them about my little story when I came to Bolivia first and had 5 field guides that were much bigger and heavier. But we also are making the contents available on a website, the Birds of Bolivia website. Our main idea here is, although it's being used very much in Bolivia, is to have basically to have birdwatchers, foreign birdwatchers interested in coming to Bolivia and spending their money in Bolivian communities on room and board, on local guides, that they can have a go-to source where they can find information relevant for birdwatching. Next, please. We have the species accounts that show the range maps, that show the drawing of the species from the book, and if possible, a photograph. And then we have the information. We still haven't completely filled in the species accounts. Obviously, you can imagine if it took us 12 years to develop this book, it's filling out species accounts for almost 1,500 species is quite a task. Next one, please. And here's a map that we have on the website. eBird, I'm not sure how many people are familiar with eBird. This is an online birding portal run by Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and it is probably the biggest birdwatching related portal on the planet. You upload your bird lists. When you go birding, the number of the species you observe, the number of individuals, and there are hotspots in this on the eBird platform. So basically, people say this is a great spot where others should go visit and birdwatch. And so this is a fairly small selection of Bolivian hotspots that we recommend. I have a couple of favorite places, but given that we have such a variation in altitude, in in latitude and longitude and habitats, biomes, ecoregions. One single hotspot, I think the most species-rich hotspot here has about 400 species, which is Sediri Lodge, which is also not coincidentally, but for certain reasons, that's also where one of the recording stations, the Songs of Adaptation recording stations, is located. And this hotspot has about 450 or so bird species. That's more species than have ever been recorded in most European countries, in single European countries, at a single area of, let's say, 100 acres or 200 acres. So again, this is here, the Birds of Bolivia webpage. The main purpose here is to get bird watchers interested in Bolivia a little more comfortable coming down to the country. Next, please. And then what else? I mentioned the range maps, and there's so much more you can do with all this. And that's also one of the reasons we dedicated more time to range maps. So we overlaid all these distribution maps we have for all the different species. The different colors simply in the range maps mean the orange is the year-round resident, brown and green mean they're migratory species, and where they're coming from, how what season they're staying. So it's all color coded in the book. So we produced an overall bird diversity map for Bolivia, and which is on the right side. So the bluer, the more species, and you can see all of northern Amazonia is highly species rich. This is down to 1 minute pixel grid the size here, so it's a little over a mile by a mile, very high resolution, and you can see that the area that's sort of bluish, hued blue with the green in the middle, all of that is Amazonia. So this is Amazonia and the adjacent East Andean slopes. And this is where most of the Bolivian bird diversity is found. But this doesn't mean this is the only area we need to focus on. By the way, the polygons, the black polygons, the lines and the numbers, these are key biodiversity areas, which is a global initiative that has been identifying for many years now. Before they were important bird areas, IBAs, now they've been converted to key biodiversity areas and also include other taxonomic groups. They're basically the most important areas for conservation birds and other organisms in the country. So, you can see even in species for high elevation areas on the left, on the west side, we have key biodiversity areas. It's not just a matter of how many species you have, but this is just an application to show you how a map for a bird field guide, a distribution map can be turned into a conservation planning tool. Next, please. So, okay, all this was, basically leads us to the following. This field guide, when I started, I just wanted a bird guide for Bolivia. Yeah, the birders and the ornithologists, we need something to identify the birds with. And when I started on this in 2006, I was blind. I was basically saying, I didn't see the full potential of this. And through many conversations, with potential future funders, colleagues, and, Daniel, it really became clear more and more, hey, this is so much more than just a book on birds, right? There are feedback loops with research, with conservation, with alternative livelihoods, and with building a constituency for birds. So it's really, field guide is a holistic approach. And in this case, because we decided not to go with a commercial publisher who's only interested in making money off of this. And you get a royalty check of a couple $100 every year, but you completely lost your rights to the book. We jointly with Future Generations, Harmonia jointly with Future Generations, we have the complete rights to the book. We can publish as many new editions as we want. We can take it to pieces and publish local guides, which we've already done. We've published a local bird guide for Lake Titicaca in support of a local tourism project there that would support the municipality of Tiwanaku, which is where the site of very well-known pre-Incan ruins in Bolivia. So this field guide really serves so many purposes and has so many applications. It's also, I've been telling, people in Bolivia have been telling me, wow, your book really changed the landscape here for conservation, for birding, for interest in birds, for the constituency building in ways that I had never imagined. I thought, maybe a couple hundred people will buy the book. and that's it. But we're now in the second edition, both in English and Spanish, and or first revised edition. And once travel will pick up again, once COVID is finally out of the way, or at least controlled, I'm expecting also, especially the English sale, to really go up, because people, birders, foreign birders, they want to, US, European, they are sick and tired of sitting at home. They're so anxious to get out birding. I'm sure we'll have a flood of birders coming to countries like Bolivia. Next, please. So in one of the comments when this was shared, the invitation, and Kelly had opened this up for comments, so there was a question, how are we balancing conservation with development? I think my presentation so far has already addressed this to a certain degree, but I want to be a little more explicit here. Bird-based tourism, I've said this more than once, is one option that can work in numerous sites. It's not a solve all. I mean, obviously there are areas that are not suited for bird-based tourism, but it can definitely work in a number of sites. On the left this is a private reserve run by Ammonia. It's in the cattle ranching area. All the land there is private, and the land is, the grassland is burned down at least once a year. The forest islands are being overexploited. It's still fairly environmentally friendly, the cattle ranching that's done there, but we can do a lot better. And it's also not just, it's not just a site for ecotourism. It's also a model ranch for sustainable cattle ranching. And Barba Azul in Spanish, that means bluebeard in English. And there's an endemic species of macaw, the blue-throated macaw, a species that has about 450 individuals left in the wild. And this ranch is protecting at least 200 of them. And on the right-hand side, this is a community-based initiative. This is the other endemic macaw in Bolivia, the red-fronted macaw. And we supported the local community. We've been supporting them for about 15 years now, working jointly with them, created also a birding lodge there. And they're protecting, this is one of the most important nesting sites for the species. They nest in cliffs. So the community is receiving income from ecological tourism, and is protecting their most valuable asset, apart from agricultural production, is the nesting cliffs of this macaw. Next, please. As I mentioned, the blue-throated macaw ranch is a model ranch for sustainable cattle ranching that we're trying to promote beyond our borders. We've had a first meeting or workshop, sustainable cattle ranching in this area, this particular area, the Llanos de Mojos. It's a huge seasonally flooded grassland area. So we're intensively managing the ranch because, as I mentioned before, usually the ranchers burn down the entire grassland once a year. And we are managing the ranch divided in different areas where we want to have tall grass, grassland or prairie, if you want to call it like that, sort of in the way it's called in the United States. And so we're managing the area with fire breaks, specific fire patch burn management, as is done in many parts of the grassland areas in the United States, to maintain a mosaic of original tall grasslands, areas used by cattle, flooded areas, and we're trying to produce better beef. And although we still have a long way to go, eventually we're following some successful initiatives in Brazil and Uruguay, where this bird-friendly beef is now sold for a higher price in the market. But that we still have a long way to go with that. But we're trying to convince local ranchers to manage their estancias, as they're called here, more ecological. Next, please. This is a much more community-based example. We are working with high Andean indigenous communities, Quechua and Aymara, safeguarding their water supply for their communities through high Andean headwater reforestation. We've done this above Madidi National Park for several years in the past. Currently, we're working in another area in Cochabamba, which also are the headwaters for the city of Cochabamba, or the metropolitan area with over 1 million people in it, which regularly suffer a serious water shortage in the dry season. So we're working with these communities to basically replant the original forest cover, especially in the headwaters, which then will help buffer dry spells and produce more regular water supply to the creeks and streams year round. And again, here, it's not like we're coming in, we're bringing 50 people to plant. The communities are directly involved. There's an education component. They're actually being paid for their work. And these communities have really welcomed us, and they're very receptive to this. And even kids are involved, and it's a big event each time we have a reforestation campaign. Next one, please. So, final slide here. As I mentioned, I've recently been promoted to Protected Area Strategy Director at National Audubon Society, the international branch, Audubon Americas. And Audubon traditionally only used to work basically in the US, in the United States, a little bit of Mexico, but the international program has been growing substantially in recent years. And as compared to earlier years, when the focus was only on North American migrant species, the Audubon Americas program explicitly now also recognizes and includes resident, threatened, and endemic species in our programs. So recently completed a business plan, which contains 4 strategies that attempt to address and mitigate the most critical threats to biodiversity and deliver lasting economic and environmental benefits for people. So all of our work recognizes the need to generate benefits for people as well. I mean, we can't just fence off areas and pretend people don't exist and say, no, we need to protect those birds there. We have to work together. We have to find win-win solutions. So the 4 strategies are the protected areas, the creation of new protected areas in direct collaboration with local communities and local communities as protagonists here. So through this, we can get habitats protected. We can contribute to climate change mitigation, sustainable livelihoods, adaptation of local communities to climate change. Then we have a working land strategy where we work with farmers to increase the productivity and profits of local farmers while creating healthier bird and wildlife habitats on the farms. There are many new approaches that actually create better habitat for birds and other wildlife and increase productivity. And these are proven approaches that we're trying to implement right now. This is being piloted in Colombia. Then we have a coastal resilience strategy focused on restoring or improving coastal bird habitat by integrating nature-based solutions, like what I showed in the slide before, but obviously the different end of the watershed, in integrating nature-based solutions into development and water sanitation agenda. And the fourth one, building a constituency for birds. Same thing as with the field guide. We need to get people involved. We need people to start caring about the environment, about nature. We need people to learn about this, about biodiversity, wildlife, why it's important. And this we're trying to achieve through national bird conservation plans, community science, education, mobilization, bird-based tourism, etc. There are a number of approaches here within that strategy. So with all this, our goal here is to capitalize on the emerging green economy and growing public interest in birds. And what's needed here, we really need to mainstream biodiversity conservation into development agendas. We can't just be the conservation guys who are seen as an obstacle to development. We really need to make sure that these development agendas do consider biodiversity, birds, and conservation jointly with the communities that we all need to benefit, people and nature, because we all depend on each other. And I think that is the last slide. Right, thank you for your attention, and very happy to answer questions now.
Sebastian, I'm going to jump right in with, and I'm sure everybody else will be hitting their applause button on the Zoom screen. I profoundly grateful, and I just will, after I make a few comments, I do want to specifically welcome the members of your colleagues who are on the Songs of Adaptation team. There are several here in participating who may want to first jump in with comments or questions, but I want to make 3 points. Number one, you have given a fantastic example and a nice phrasing, making scholarship available to people. Sebastian, I'm going to be using that phrase in a whole bunch of grant proposals.
I think
that
you
have
came up with that
grabbed
phrase. It's in an
What?
email from you.
Well, let's call it teamwork. Because you have taken up some of my words that I'm known for spinning, but you've now put the substance in a scholarly way. You've given the citation behind the word phrase. We're going to use this presentation by you as a citation, as an example for fundraising, as an example for research. And when you gave these 4 domains of research that you're talking about, of research, of livelihoods, and research, and you've really covered the spectrum of what we mean by making a scholarship available to people. I really this fits so nicely. And I just, before I turn it over first to Naomi and then anybody else from the songs team and then anybody else that we have minutes for, that one image of the child holding the potted plant, to me, is a fantastic image of what we mean when we say future generations. That's showing future generations on so many multiple messaging levels. Of course, everything was lovely, but I did want to specifically flag that. I don't want to say any more beyond, I'm sure others want to, but anybody first from the Songs of Adaptation team would like to jump in, and then more broadly from our, we've had up to 40 people on this call, and I really am so happy and grateful, Sebastian. But to the songs people, do you want to jump in with some comments? Unmute your mics, please. Some people are trying to speak.
Hi, sorry, I couldn't talk until they switched my status. Thank you, Sebastian. I really appreciated your talk, and it's really good to see many of the pieces brought together. And just briefly on the Songs of Adaptation project of Future Generations, I want to say that there's no way that we could do this project without the local partnership, the strong local partnership of you and folks on the ground in Bolivia and Nepal and other places who really know the context and also the needs of the communities there. Our team on North Mountain has focused on the technology pieces, but we really need the grounding of working with practitioners there to sort of build what we're calling the user stories of how to use this data both for science and for communities. So these partnerships are really instrumental, and it's been great working with you, Sebastian.
This is a really exciting project. And again, it was one of those things that I had heard about, I had read about, but I never thought I would get involved in. And it's being, I spent, for my PhD research, I spent 4 field seasons of about 6 months each in the Andes recording bird sounds, because in the tropical forests, 90% of the species present, you hear much more frequency than you see them. So as a neotropical ornithologist who's doing bird inventories, you need to work with bird sound. So back then I had a cassette tape. Some of the older folks here on the call may remember cassettes, these little rectangular things that had a magnetic tape running around on the side. Sound remotely familiar? And I had that. I had a bulky recorder like this, a directional microphone, and I have hundreds of hours of bird sound recordings. And that I all basically did my, then reviewing these recordings, you had to rewind all the time. What was that? What does a little beep in the background? So it was it was basically, it's technology has advanced so much, right? And now we have everything digital. You can see a spectrogram of your sound. It's like it has revolutionized bird identification. It has revolutionized the possibilities for obtaining real-time data on how birds respond to environmental change.
Thank you. Are there other comments from the global team? You have to raise your hand, unfortunately, because you can't just speak into your mic. So if you have to raise the hand so that we know that we can unmute your mic. Well, I definitely do have another comment that I want to jump in on here. As Future Generations is sorting out its next steps forward as a university, this whole example that we now have here, Sebastian, of field guide, which you've done such a magnificent job on, and we're actually making a few dollars off of it, and we hope to make more as it comes out. But how do we get these types of field guides into, I know, for instance, our work in Nepal with Tirtha Shrestha is trying to put it into school curricula. We're trying to get it onto news media. And I just curious, Sebastian, how would you think in the Bolivian context, this knowledge can be used in other extension educational media, such as schools, such as news media, social media. So as a final few minutes that we have left here, Sebastian, would you like to give your thoughts, your dreams for how to use this?
And remember, Daniel, we already talked about this a couple of years back when I was visiting to try to get this into the schools. Having this inserted officially in the national school curriculum is something that I'm not even sure how feasible it is. It definitely would be a long haul, right? It's not something that you have a couple meetings about and get this included. But I can see there's a lot of interest. I mean, obviously, there are always several ways to do something like this, right? We now have all the materials. We have the illustrations, we have the texts. It would be very easy to turn this into educational publications or educational little booklets with the 20 most common species. It could be just nationally, the 50 most common species in Bolivia. What do they eat? What do they, that sort of natural history information, and how do they help us humans? How do they pollinate our food plants? How do they keep the nasty insects, the caterpillars of our food plants so that we can still harvest? That sort of stuff. But then it would I mean, maybe it would be something that's more feasible at a municipal or state level to get more efficiently into a broader range of schools. Because obviously what we as an NGO, like Harmonia, what we would usually do is we produce the materials, we have someone, an educator who works with the school teachers to build their capacity, and then depends on the school teachers to bring that into their schools, right? But this is obviously something that only can be done very locally, because I mean, we can't work in the, 200 municipalities in the country simultaneously unless we would really have millions of dollars for this. But my initial sort of thought about approaching this, apart from maybe starting with a few pilot schools, which then could be advocates for this, right, and could convince their colleagues, their peers, or including state educational institutions to take this to a new level, right? But I would go in two different routes. Start with a couple pilot schools, and start talking to the officials in municipalities and in state governments responsible for education. right? And see if we can get, you know, a foot in the door somewhere. And then all the material is there. All it can be used. It can be converted into educational for school children of all ages, right? It would just basically take some funding to get it converted, and then to print the material, and then to work with the schools. And usually what we do is we first work with the teachers, right? We get them up to speed. We train the teachers so that they can know how to use the material and bring that into their classrooms and teach their students accordingly.
We're at time, but I just wanted to pick up with a huge amount of enthusiasm. There are several members of the Future Generations development team on this, and so I'm talking directly to you. Let's put this on the development team agenda as a fundraising push, because what I'm hearing when I'm listening to Sebastian describe this specifically for this bird project is the fact that our nature-based economies team with Maple is also talking about school education and how to take this use of the environment, for instance, that we've talked about here with birds, but they're talking about it in terms of economic productivity from the environment. And also on this webinar is Laura, who's been doing the whole role of scholarship on health, taking it into homes through mothers. And also in this webinar is Ajmal Shirzai from Afghanistan, who is actively with Future Generations Afghanistan program, making the connection between agriculture, food production in Afghanistan, using the schools and using the youth. So I just pick up several of these examples. Oh, of course, we also have the work in Vietnam through the Bending Bamboo curriculum that is taking the whole SDGs and making that available to schools and to school children. We're working with our dozen alumni in Vietnam. So there is a global engagement with Future Generations, about Future Generations, taking the theme of making scholarship available to people. And I find this very exciting. And I think this was probably something that we're going to try to grow and evolve as we share among our global team in the coming years. And we are at time, so I'm sure we could keep going. But Sebastian, on behalf of all of us from around the world, deep thank you and congratulations for the really fantastic science you have done, the fantastic extension that you've done to make scholarship available to people. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, everybody. I mean, I'm deeply honored to have the opportunity here to present the work in Bolivia, not to an academic audience, not at a, just another bird conference, but really to people who all over the world trying to make a difference, who look beyond the academic ivory tower or, the paper publishing or just the classroom teaching, but really to, I hope you all learned something today, or, spark maybe an idea. And I'm looking forward to connecting to these presentations every third or fourth Tuesday. Is it third or fourth?
Every fourth Tuesday, every month.
Every fourth Tuesday, and listen to what others have to share about their experiences and work. Thank you.
Well, Sebastian, here's all the notes that I put on top of your bird book when as you were talking.
I'm glad
Thank you.
Useful in multiple ways.
Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody who's joined from around the world. We appreciate it. And again, thank you, Sebastian, for the honor of being on our team.
My pleasure. Bye.